Welcome to this Baptist News Global webinar. Here's your host, Mark Wingfield.
Hey everyone, I'm Mark Wingfield, Executive Director of Baptist News Global, and we've had some odd technical problems today, but we've got Terry York on the phone with us right here, which I'm holding my phone up in front of the laptop technology. Can't live without it and can't live with it sometimes. And here we are, but it seems like everyone can hear him okay. And what we're talking about today is Terry's new book on Kurt Kaiser. And Terry, I'm holding up a copy of it right here so everyone can see it. Beautiful, big book. And Terry, well-known church musician, educator, professor, leader at Baylor, and a friend of Kurt Kaiser as well. So that's why he was able to do this. And Terry, we're so glad to have you with us today to talk about this.
Thank you.
I was this morning, I was digging through all my old sheet music, and somewhere I have a Kurt Kaiser songbook from the 70s. It's spiral bound. I think it, but I think it's in a box somewhere now. I couldn't quite find it.
I understand.
Yeah. So it seems to me we need to understand Kurt's story and the story you're telling in the book. As I read it, I thought, okay, we've got to get everyone up to speed on some vocabulary here. And one of the biggest players in this story is Word Records. And,
Yes.
You know, a lot of us are old enough to remember Word Records. But could we start with you explaining to us what was Word Records? Where did it come from? And how did it end up in Waco?
It started by a student at Baylor, a guy named Gerald McCracken, back in the late 50s. And he started out of the garage. I think he was living in an apartment over a garage. And downstairs in the garage, he made a recording of a football game, and it sounded like a football game, but it was supposed to, it was really the Bible and the salvation story and that kind of thing. Anyway, he started selling copies of that, and it caught on, and then he started doing other kinds of just spoken things, sermons and that kind of thing that he would make recordings of, and he'd sell them around, I guess, Baylor and the Waco area. And then he eventually wants to get into music, recording music, and he had a guy named Paul Mickelson who helped him, but Paul lived in California, and that was not real convenient. So he asked Paul to move to Waco, and Paul didn't want to. So Gerald started looking for someone else to be in charge of his music recording. And a couple of the people he had recorded earlier, just very early, a couple of music recordings, they said, there's this kid up in Chicago named Kurt Kaiser. You need to go see him. And Gerald did. He went up there and had Kurt do a sort of a trial run production of a recording, and Gerald loved it. And that's how it got started.
So Word Records went on to become, by my estimation, one of the most significant players in what would come to be known as contemporary Christian music. But I don't think that label even existed then, right?
Well, yeah, Word did become that. The contemporary Christian music was something that was named quite later, actually just a year or two after the genre got started, I suppose. But it's, it became the lead, as you suggested, became the lead record label in recording groups that were already going, and then starting to, if you will, create artists, and with the music and the artists at the same time becoming something fresh and become something new. And Word was leading out in that. And Gerald McCracken, who started Word, owned Word, was not a musician. So he needed a musician that could guide him into this new territory that he saw had the potential of being quite lucrative.
So help us understand the recording scene at that time. You had RCA and other big labels that recorded, maybe gospel music or certain projects, but they were tapping a market that really wasn't being tapped, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah, places like you said, RCA, Camden, and some of those, they were doing people like George Beverly Shea and other people who were known on sort of the evangelism circuit. And what McCracken had an idea could happen. And I think Paul Mickelson helped him to see, yes, it can happen. But Paul just didn't want, as I said, he didn't want to move to Waco to help make it happen there. It was brand new territory when finally Gerald McCracken got Kurt to join the company. Kurt was able to go into fresh new things. Now, Kurt, though, knew this, that Ralph, I have to see in a moment, that helped Kurt with, tell it like it is. Ralph Carmichael.
Yes.
Ralph Carmichael was doing some very early work in some fresh things, and Kurt was aware of that. Kurt, as a young man, was buying, or he was actually listening to the recordings. Didn't buy them. He just went to a record store and listened to them, and didn't buy them. But he was quite taken with Ralph Carmichael, and they found each other. They bumped into each other at Winona Lake, which was a sort of like a Ridgecrest or Glorietta, to put it in Baptist terms, or it was a retreat center, and they were doing some gospel music things, and Carmichael was in charge of the music, and Kurt was there as a accompanist, because he is really gaining through the radio. He was gaining some attention as a great pianist. So Kurt becomes Ralph Carmichael's accompanist at the Winona Lake Music Week kind of thing. And so Kurt's in awe of Carmichael because he'd been listening to his recordings. Carmichael gets in awe of Kurt because he's hearing him at the piano. And that's how they sort of met each other. Carmichael was already getting into these new things, and Kurt was very, very interested in that, quite taken by it. So I think he saw, when he was talking to Gerald McCracken about coming to Word, that Kurt would have an opportunity to start exploring some of these new ideas, sort of in the wake of Carmichael. But he ended up, I think, equaling Carmichael, and in some instances, you talk to not only being his equal, but at times leading the way.
Yeah, that's just a fascinating connection through all of that. I mean, for those of us of a certain age, growing up in the church, these are household names for us. But it's hard to explain today the influence that Word Records had in that time, and I think it's fascinating to know how this all came to be in a place like Waco, right? I mean, for those who don't know, Waco's not an urban center.
Right. And one of the things that helped, I think, at that point was that the Southern Baptists did this little musical called, I'm sorry, the first musical that they, Good News.
Good News, yeah.
Yeah, the Southern Baptists are doing Good News. This is like 1967. And Kurt was very much aware of what Southern Baptists were doing because he was a member now in Waco of a Southern Baptist church. They moved to Waco in 1959. Well, in 1967, here comes Good News from the Southern Baptists. And so because he is at Baylor, he's not on faculty, but because he's across the street from Baylor University, they're at 7th and James Baptist Church. And because he has an ear to the ground of what's happening in recorded music, he becomes aware of Good News, and he starts saying, we can do better than that. We being, in the book, I asked the question, does he mean we at Word Music, or does he mean we Baptists can do better than that? So anyway, he calls Carmichael, and Carmichael said, yeah, let's give it a shot. Let's do something for the kids. So Carmichael started writing some fresh things for this project. Kurt started writing some fresh things for this project, and they weren't talking to each other. They were just writing. And then later they get together and compare notes. I wrote this, I wrote that, and you wrote this, and they start putting them in sequence. And that's when Tell It Like It Is was born. Tell It Like It Is came out in 1969 and was an immediate smash hit, surprised them all. Because Tell It Like It Is took what had been done by Good News and took it to another level. Good News was called a folk musical, so was Tell It Like It Is. But Good News was more like a Peter, Paul, and Mary or Coming Out of Appalachia or something folk musical.
Right.
When Tell It Like It Is used the term folk musical, they meant more like Broadway. And that caught on immediately and just went crazy. It was selling just in a tremendous pace. And so that launched Word Music. I mean, they were already in business, but this now gives Word Music the reputation and this artifact, this musical, to say, this is who we are now. This is what we're doing. We're fresh. And it got on television, and NBC did a presentation of Tell It Like It Is. And so then other companies, Sunday School Board with the Baptist Sunday School Board that did Good News, they said, we can write some of these things too. So they started writing, and other companies popped up and started writing. So for a while, contemporary music was basically youth musicals.
That's my childhood, yes.
Yeah, it was youth musicals. But then that started launching what we've now referred to as the Christian pop artists. They came sort of along that same line, but everyone realized, hey, there's something new happening when Tell It Like It Is came out.
So just to make sure we have the chronology correct here, in the youth musical genre that happened in the 60s, late 60s into the 70s and 80s, it began with Good News, which was published by the Baptist Sunday School Board.
Correct.
And then you had Tell It Like It Is, published by Word. And then you had Celebrate Life, again published by the Sunday School Board.
Yeah, and that was in 1972, I think, when Celebrate Life came out. Now, just between you and me and the fence post, I think Celebrate Life was the pinnacle of this whole thing.
Agreed.
As far as quality of it is concerned. But we have to go back and I think and say that Tell It Like It Is was such a smash success, and the music, I think, was excellent. The work was excellent, and it got such widespread usage that if you go back and look, you might see Tell It Like It Is a peak just a bit higher than Celebrate Life. But Celebrate Life was, I think, musically a bit stronger, maybe a bit more quality. And I don't think Kurt would push back on that, because after Celebrate Life came out, he quickly did one called Just for You, and it was for young adults. So, Celebrate Life was for youth, but it moved into young adults beyond high school. And then Kurt kind of catches up with that by doing a musical called Just for You, which was excellent, absolutely excellent. And so they started, the Baptist Sunday School Board and Word Music were bouncing off of each other directly and indirectly. And then I say in the book that Kurt was playing both sides of the field.
Yeah.
I mean, Monday and Wednesday, he was a Southern Baptist. But when he went to work, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, he was in competition with Southern Baptists there at Word. So it was a synergy came between Word Music and Baptist Sunday School Board. 2 + 2 = 5, because the same people were a couple days a week they're brothers in the church, and the rest of the time of the week they are competitors in the marketplace. And it was really quite an amazing energy that came from that.
So I love that in the book. It reminded me of, back in that earlier day, how very Baptist Baylor was, before it had an international reputation. It was just like a regular Southern Baptist school. And you had this really high quality school of music already there that's feeding into churches, right? But the other thing about Kurt is he had come from a Church of the Brethren background?
Yeah, he was, Plymouth Brethren. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Plymouth Brethren up in Chicago.
So he had a vision beyond Southern Baptists And I think the thing that's fascinating about the story you tell is in the midst of the Baptist Sunday School Board being the dominant publisher for churches in that period, he was able to bridge beyond that to bring in really the larger mainline and evangelical community, right?
Exactly right. And I would say to you that the reason that that's true is because the Baptist Sunday School Board, the church music department of the Baptist Sunday School Board had to answer to that denomination. I mean, they had to answer theologically. They had to put their curriculum inside and their work inside a larger sort of strategy of the Southern Baptist Convention. Word did not have that obligation at all. So word could go places more quickly and maybe even a little more edgy than the Church Music Department of the Southern Baptist Convention could, because of who answered to who. And Word was just a commercial company. The Church Music Department of the Southern Baptist Convention was a department of a convention. So they had all kinds of responsibilities that kind of slowed them down, gave direction, but they had to get a bunch of people to sign off on every project they did. Kurt didn't have to get anybody to sign off on everything he did. Yeah. So they could go very much quickly. And if like Tell It Like It Is ends up on stage or on camera in New York, there would have to be 2 or 3 levels of people signing off to see if this thing that the Church Music Department of Southern Baptist Convention did could go on the same venue. And so it was not an equal race, though there was equal quality in the people who were writing, equal desire in the people who were writing to present something fresh for the churches. It's just the Sunday School Board, the Church Music Department of Southern Baptist had a little bit more clumsy pathway.
Yeah. And yet the lab Kurt is working in every week is a Southern Baptist church, Seventh James, exactly, where he's got a college choir and he's got all of these people around him that are giving him the you even write the book that he like tested out stuff there.
Yeah, he really did. And then for a while, he was the conductor of a group called the BRH Choir, the Baylor Religious Hour Choir, which was not a part of the church music or of the music department of Baylor, but it was related to Baylor through extracurricular Bible study and that kind of thing. So anyway, Kurt becomes actually the first non-Baylor person to conduct the BRH, Baptist Religious Hour Choir. So he has the BRH Choir, which has that kind of connection to Baylor. He has the choir that he's part of there at Seventh James Baptist Church. So, and then now and then he can call the students into a third thing and call it the Kaiser Singers and let them do a demo album. So he has this rich resource of college students that know Baptist frontwards and backwards, and he can channel all of that through a commercial label. And it was a great combination. It was a great formula for getting new things out very quickly and getting a lot of attention.
Well, and just for anyone listening who doesn't know the geography here, Seventh James Baptist Church is located practically on the Baylor campus. It is literally across the street.
That's correct, yes.
So yeah, the two things, particularly in those days, were so deeply intertwined, right? Well, yes. So Terry, how does Word Records and Kurt move from youth musicals into sort of what we might call Christian pop artists?
Well, it's sort of some overlap there. For instance, in some of the recordings that Kurt did, he used some young talent that would eventually become their own individual Christian artists. And so they start recording them. So while they're recording youth musicals, that kind of thing, they begin to record artists that not just the artists that were singing the Saturday night revivals, somewhere in Chicago or something. Right. Artists who were associated, from the very beginning with this fresh new sound. So they're doing musicals, they're doing, starting to create and launch some of these artists, and it was simultaneous and sort of it fed off of each other there for a long time.
So I know one of the examples you give in the book is Evie, Evie Turnquist.
Turnquist.
Yeah. Who, I mean, I'm only 5'11", but I'm going to heaven. That makes me feel 10 feet tall.
Yes.
Who are some others who came through that early system that you might be?
Johnny Erickson Tata.
Yes.
She was one. You remember she was in a wheelchair.
Yes.
Very sad accident when she was a teenager. She was one. In fact, she was the last big name, I think, that Kurt signed. But then Kurt would also, as did other people, he would bring in some folks that were making some inroads in the regular pop music, but he did a lot of celebrities. I mean, all the way from Dale Evans from Roger,
Right.
The Cowboy Show, to Carol Lawrence and B.J. Thomas, and some of these people who had already had a recording identity, would come over and do albums, recording projects with him, for him. And so that gave some energy to it. And I think gave them room then to have other kinds of recording artists start from scratch. Yeah. There were two women named Dana who he got them started, and there were others. I think one of the most interesting stories for me was that Bob Dylan. And wanted to do a Christian recording, and Kurt turned him down. And Kurt said he turned it down because what Bob Dylan had in mind and what Word Music had in mind didn't match. And he just said no. And he was asked later if he regretted that. And he said no, because in fact, Bob Dylan only did like 2 or 3 Christian recordings. Right. And then he stopped doing Christian recordings, and of course, Word kept on going. So I think Kurt had a pretty good sixth sense about who had a possible future here, who had potential, and who didn't, and still keep Word within the vision of what they had from the very beginning.
Yeah, that's a really great example in there. Now, the other factor in this all along is that Kurt is composing and arranging, right?
Yes.
And it seems to me that probably is along with the things you're talking about, but also in addition to, right? So how does that factor in?
Well, Kurt was a remarkably gifted musician. And one of the things he could do very well was to hear a singer perform and know how to write music for them that would get the very best out of their skill set, out of their abilities. So he starts arranging existing songs, writing new songs specifically for these folks that he's recording. And he's just right on the target. I mean, he can write for them the things where they just soar, and where their singers just soar. So he had this ability to hear somebody, know what they're capable of doing, and write for them beautifully. And then he turns around and he's the producer of the recording, and often sometimes even the pianist. I mean, he's the accompanist for them, but he can also orchestrate. So he can hear them, write for them, arrange for them, orchestrate for them, play the piano for them. He can do the whole thing. And so that saves time. And there's a real efficiency there, that you hear this person say, yes, if I give them this kind of song in this key, and if I give this orchestration, and we record in this kind of a setting, and he could do every one at every stop, he could do it very, very well. So it was just a fast track. And he's really quite amazing at that.
So did this make Word Records financially successful?
Very much so. Very much so. Yes. And to be honest, it made Kurt financially successful. Tell It Like It Is, for instance, went so far so fast that and I put this in the book, most of the time Kurt didn't pay much attention to family finances. Pat, his wife, took care of that. But Tell It Like It Is was bringing in a remarkable amount of money per week. Kurt steps into the family finances, gets a friend who's a economics professor at Baylor to help him figure this out. So they decide what to do with the money coming in from royalties and keep on living just on what he's getting in the paychecks from Word. And that allowed Kurt to retire fairly early. But that's just to say that was just for him. The bigger company, the bigger picture, Word, they were doing very, very well. They got the attention of other companies and not just other Christian companies.
Well, so that's what ultimately Word gets bought by one of the bigger companies, right?
Yeah, I mean, Word gets bought by ABC, and I think I've got this in the right sequence. ABC TV, and then they sell it to the company up in Nashville that owned Opryland and all that kind of stuff. Gaylord. Yeah, and other companies inside the Christian circle and outside and just commercial. It was bought and sold 2 or 3 times, and the reason was because they were so successful that they got that kind of attention. And Kurt was right there. Now, he wasn't the only one, but he was always present. I write in the book that I can't find anything that he started or anything that he did absolutely the best. Nobody was close to him. But I did find this, that while he was doing his excellent work, when these other firsts and most and best would happen, Kurt was somewhere in the picture. He was somewhere on the stage. And either he was the one who did it or some other people around him, or he was one of the people around somebody else who did it as an encourager. And so he was, that's why I come up with the subtitle for the book, Icon and Conscience, because he could just step into a meeting, he could step onto a stage, he could step into a performance, and everybody sat up or stood up just a little straighter. They behaved themselves a little more like a Christian and an honest business person. And he just had that, and he didn't have to preach to anybody or tell anybody off. He just walked in his own persona and his own walk with the Lord, encouraged and sort of lifted any situation he walked into. It was quite amazing.
So I want to back up just a little bit and talk about his influence in what would come to be known as I'm going to use the phrase, the Christian chorus, the pass it on kind of songs, right? Yeah. That are sung in youth groups and at camps and Sunday night church and all those things, right? Early on, at least, I mean, Kurt was the master of that stuff, right?
He really was. And he wasn't the only one. He was a master, and everyone knew it. A lot of those choruses came from the musicals. For instance, Pass It On came from Tell It Like It Is. But Oh, How He Loves You and Me just was born of itself. It was not hooked onto a musical. It did not come from a musical. But many of the choruses that people would go around singing and would be at campfires and be in other kinds of collections of choruses and songbooks and even in hymnals, they came from the musicals, or they came from specific songs written for specific voices, as we mentioned earlier. So that was one of the byproducts of this movement. One of the subsets was these singable choruses that kids would learn maybe at camp around a campfire, and then they go back and they want to sing them Sunday night. And then when they grew up, they wanted to sing them Sunday morning. And before you know it, some of those choruses are ending up in hymnals. Yeah,
that's exactly right. There's a story you tell in the book, and I'm having trouble remembering which chorus it is, where someone he's hearing someone speak at a church and says this phrase that's very familiar to us now that I, of course, can't remember. And he goes and writes this beautiful chorus out of it.
I don't remember that exactly. One of his famous choruses, though, He Careth for You, is from a sermon. It's actually from a song that he had heard, just a little chorus as a child. And he connected it. He was reminded about it later, and it began to. He recorded, wrote it a little more fuller, and recorded it. I don't remember exactly the one you're talking about. It could be in there at my age.
Was it Every Day with Jesus?
I don't know.
Is that his? No, it's Sweeter Than the Day Before. Yeah, I'll think of it. I'll think of it in a minute. So let's sort of move forward then, and you have this wonderfully successful commercial enterprise that's situated adjacent to what is then the world's largest Baptist university, with an outstanding music school and the connection to the Southern Baptist churches as well. But there comes a point at which Kurt becomes a church planter for a truly unique Baptist church, Dayspring in Waco. Talk to us about how that came to be, because for anyone who doesn't know Dayspring, which is still a very vibrant church today, it is in its DNA not a typical Baptist church.
No, it's really not. My wife and I are members of that church. We have been for a number of years now. And our mission statement is sacred, simple, period. And that gives you a little bit of an idea about how this church thinks a little bit differently, but it's fully a Baptist church. Kurt and Pat, and they raised their 4 kids in 7th and James Baptist Church, as we've already said, across the street from Baylor. And for Kurt, coming from Plymouth Brethren in Chicago down to 7th and James in Waco, it was a revival for him and for Pat. There was a freshness, there was creativity, there was life that they had not seen in their Plymouth Brethren church, which sometimes the services were in German up in Chicago. So there was this freshness that just was an epiphany for them. But after a while, as happens in any church, they find out that they're human and they're going to church with humans, and new pastors come and all of that. Finally, Kurt and Pat were, I would say, talked into joining about, maybe 4 or 5 other couples to start a new church in Waco. And they did. They started a new church, and it was Dayspring Baptist Church. For the first year of that church, they purposefully did not hire a pastor. They used different people from Baylor faculty, different preachers that were available in the central Texas area. And for a year, just kind of talked about, who do we want to be? Who are we? What's this church look like? And then a year into the existence of Dayspring Baptist Church, they called Bert Burleson as their first pastor. Bert, by the way, is currently, and has been for some time now, chaplain at Baylor University.
And is the grandson of a former Baylor president?
There is a connection there, but I don't know if it's that.
Great nephew. There's a relationship. Yeah, to Rufus.
There's a relationship, yes.
Yeah.
So yes, Kurt and Pat helped start Dayspring Baptist Church, and the church is flourishing, if I do say so, as my wife would say. When my wife and I are members there. Kurt was, when the church got started, they met in Seventh-day Adventist Fellowship Hall, and they finally could have their own building. And Kurt, of course, was in charge of the music, which was the piano service, and they had choir. And they had choir about 6 or 8 people that met at Kurt and Pat's house around the piano for choir rehearsal. And that's kind of how that got started. Yeah, they were church planters indeed.
And the music at Dayspring from the beginning intentionally was more, I think, by his own description and yours, contemplative.
It was contemplative and it was organic. The preacher, he would get together with whoever was preaching, or when finding Bert Burleson's there all the time as the pastor. And they would talk about what's going to preach on, and the service. They followed the liturgical year, so they would know what scripture passages were coming up. And he would write songs, prayer responses, or different kinds of music that would work in the liturgy, work in the worship service. And so Kurt would write those. Sometimes he and Bert would write. They wrote enough that they were known as Kurt and Bert songs. Kurt Kaiser and Bert Burleson are writing these songs that are prayer responses, or they're calls to worship, or they're benedictions, and they're beautiful. We still sing several of them at Dayspring. And from the beginning, that church understood, that congregation understood our music should come from our experience and our community. And it still does to some extent. That still happens, though not as much now that Kurt is gone.
Yeah. So I've been thinking, since I read the book, I've been thinking on this question. I cannot think of another well-known, high-profile composer, arranger, producer in the Christian music genre who also was the kind of consummate churchman that Kurt was.
I don't know either. I'm sure there are some. Let me say that again. I'm sure there are some, but I'm not aware either. Now some of the folks that worked with Kurt at Word could fit that description. One being Charlie Brown. Charles F. Brown. He was a remarkable churchman and remarkable composer. John Purifoy is one that could fit that description as well. So there's some out there, but probably certainly none more, maybe not many as much with the impact and the renown of Kurt.
So you just touched on another thing, and that is the influence Kurt had on other composers, arrangers, performers. Yeah. We talked about some of the recording artists, but really he was an influence on, as you say these names, I'm thinking any sanctuary choir in a Baptist church, if you're going to know these names, right? People that he somehow helped nurture or mentor along the way.
Yeah, those I just mentioned. You could add to that list Mark Hayes. You could Twyla Paris. They just go on and on of folks who came through Baylor, came through Seventh and James, were in one way or another, officially or unofficially, connected with Kurt's work, and went on to become great composers, and even some to own their own music companies. And they look back and say, yeah, Kurt was exceedingly important in those formative years for them. Yeah.
So earlier on, you mentioned about the influence that Ralph Carmichael had on Kurt, and the influence Kurt had on Ralph Carmichael. Exactly. And certainly, in certain quarters, Ralph Carmichael becomes well known as a nationally known composer and arranger, even beyond the church space, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Did their friendship endure?
I'm sorry, what's that?
Did their friendship endure? Did they stay connected?
They did until Kurt's death, and then Ralph died not too many years after Kurt, and Ralph suffered from dementia. I wanted to interview him for this book, and his wife said that there would be nothing that he could tell me that would be reliable. But yes, their friendship endured for the rest of their lives. Yeah, and it started off, as I said, Kurt was in awe of Ralph, and then Ralph is impressed with Kurt, and then they work together. And there finally comes a time where I think it's safe to say, in a public place like this, where Kurt becomes almost a spiritual guide for Ralph. So they kind of took turns, who's helping who at the moment in this wonderful combined ministries.
So, throughout the 70s into the 80s, and by the time you get to the 90s and beyond, the whole contemporary Christian music genre has become a commercialized thing and a very celebrity-driven. And you've got Nashville, involved. We've already mentioned all that, right? You got tours going on and all this stuff. How did Kurt follow along with that trajectory that was happening in that part of the, I'll call it industry?
Well, at the beginning, he helped get it started. he helped envision it, helped get it started. And then for a while, he was one of the main guides and one of the main promoters and one of the engines for that. And then it came to a time, and I want to be careful how I say this because it's not unique to Kurt and Word in that time frame. There came a time where the contemporary Christian and the Christian artist starts going on a trajectory that is not the consistent trajectory of Kurt's principles and Kurt's commitments.
Right.
And it has to do, and I say in the book a couple of times that Kurt had some standards. One was biblical, one was connecting of the music that he wrote to the church. He also wanted the highest standards of music, and he wanted straight-laced business and morals. Those pillars, and he keeps on with those pillars in ways that he understands them to be defined. And now and then, here comes an artist who doesn't quite hang in there, but is making a lot of money.
Yeah.
Or now and then, here comes a popular sort of strain of music that Kurt does not feel is living up to the best musical standards. And let me say there, he believed that just about any musical style could have high musical standards. So it wasn't that he was a snob about styles. He was simply committed to standards in any and every genre. So if he saw that there's, a composer or an artist or a style of music that was getting lax in its musical standards, he could not be a part of that. And so after a while, though he's still at Word, his principles are starting to rub against some new directions in the trajectory, starting to rub against some new interpretations and applications of these principles. And that eventually becomes an issue.
Yeah. So let me pause and say to those who are online, I'm going to ask one other question right now, and I want to ask you to begin queuing up questions if you just use the Q&A box and give us some questions that you'd like to ask Terry about this. All right. While we're waiting on that, Terry, I want to put you on the spot. Out of Kurt's vast library of songs, what are your favorites?
Oh my, that's tough. I'm glad you allowed me favorites. One of them is an anthem came out of his young adult musical, Just For You, called In His Love and in His Pity. I love that. Another one is Benediction that came out of a musical he did with Charlie Brown called God's People. And it's just a short little benediction, the Lord whom we love, whom we worship and adore.
Yeah.
The Lord whom we love, I really like that one. And then I also like one that he called His Way Mine. I'm sorry, that's not it. His Will Our Own. His Will Our Own. So there are two or three that I think that I really enjoy, but I would probably put In His Love and in His Pity at the top of that list. But there's some remarkable, not only some remarkable songs that I really like, but there are also some of his arrangements of his own songs.
Yeah,
I think were quite fetching and the arrangement brought freshness even to the original song. But I guess In His Love and in His Pity, and in that little benediction, the Lord whom we love, and
yeah, I know that one.
His will our own. I like Oh How He Loves You and Me, but that's got a little story to it that you may remember from the book. He tried to get that registered with the United States
The copyright
people, and they said it's too short, needed a second stanza. which he was not real happy about that. So he quickly writes a second stanza, sends it to him. He gets the copyright, and they put it in the hymnal. It goes on a recording. But he said several times that second stanza was never meant to be sung. He wrote it for some clerk in D.C. To satisfy the requirement. But he finally gives in to the fact that people loved it, and he started using it, both stanzas as well.
So I'm guessing "Oh How He Loves You and Me" and "Pass It On" would maybe be his best known pieces.
Yes, which to him was, he didn't mind that. He was thankful that the Lord let him write those. But he spent a lot of his life trying to show people in word and deed that that's not the only thing he wrote, or not the only thing he could write.
Right. Okay, we got a question here. The question is, we haven't heard any mention of Billy Ray Hearn. How did Kurt and Billy work together, or did they?
They did. They worked together closely in the early days of Word. In fact, if we go back to "Oh How He Loves You and Me," Billy Ray Hearn had worked with, because he was a Southern Baptist minister of music through and through. Billy Ray Hearn was also a graduate of Baylor University. Billy Ray Hearn was working at Word when the Baptists came out with Good News. So Billy Ray helped Baptists write and put together Good News. He helped get it going and being sung in churches. But he's sitting in Waco while he's doing it. He turns right around and encourages and helps Ralph Carmichael and Kurt Kaiser do Tell It Like It Is. In fact, Billy Ray at times would say, "I think you need to change some of the words in this song," to Ralph, or he'll say to Kurt, "Give us another one," or "Let's not use this song." Billy Ray was very important, kind of behind the scenes, in getting Tell It Like It Is into shape, and then very much up front and center in the promotion of it in churches throughout the United States and on all kinds of stages. So Billy Ray Hearn was a remarkable player, though it's kind of just off stage a little bit. And he knew music, he knew Baptist churches especially, and he had the confidence of both Ralph Carmichael and Kurt Kaiser in the early work they were doing, especially on Tell It Like It Is.
Let's end with this last question. When we consider roughly the last 60 years of Kurt's influence in shaping church music, how is the state of church music today enduringly influenced by Kurt?
That's interesting. I'm not sure. I'm happy to step into that. I'm not sure I know I cannot give you the final word on that. I think what if Kurt still stays with us in our day and time is his insistence that the music be something that the church can do, that the music be something that is biblically strong, that it's something that is musically strong. And I think those things stay with us. He obviously could move from genre and style and do excellent work, but he never left those principles as being guiding principles for him. And I think they're still with us. And when Southern Baptists and all church musicians, even Catholics, thanks to Vatican II, when all church musicians were trying to decide how much should we sing of the culture's music, how much should we sound like the culture and all that, he's saying, do as much of it as you can do and still be connected to the Bible, to good music, and to the church. And I think that's what stays with us of his work, his influence.
Beautiful. Well, thank you. And again, I'm holding up for everyone to see. This is the book, Kurt Kaiser, Icon and Conscience of Contemporary Christian Music. And it's a beautiful history. If you are like me and have grown up in the church, you've experienced this music and known the influence through so many ways. Terry, thank you so much for enduring with us through technical difficulties, but we made it.
Yeah, we made it. And I'm sorry for whatever I contributed to those things.
We're all good. We're all good. Thanks, everyone.
Support independent faith-based journalism. Baptist News Global.